You're listening to The Tiny Bloodthirster, a competitive Warhammer 40k podcast.
Hello, I'm The Tiny Bloodthirster, and today we're going to look at some of the recent Warhammer 40,000 tournaments and the top lists from these events. I've been collecting data all edition long, which admittedly is not very long, but I'm going to break it down into some digestible nuggets for you today. And if you hate videos but love pictures more, well, I've got some charts below to illustrate all of this. So, how does this work? Well, if you're familiar with Magic the Gathering Goldfish, then it's pretty much that, but for 40k. For those of you who aren't addicted to the cardboard crack, I look at recent GTs and majors, take all the lists that were a .79 win-loss or better, basically that just means 4-1 record or better than that, and break down how many of these lists each unit appeared in to look for a list archetype. Last episode I covered the Wizards Asylum GT, Boardroom Brawl, Vanguard Tactics GT, and Adelaide 40k GT. Since then I've updated the data to include Flying Monkey Con, STC Cilicia Team Championship, and Bolter Strafe Wojny 9th. The dataset is now up to 7 GTs with 38 lists. I realize we're still early in the edition, but I've already got a lot of good data here to sift through. If you would like to look at the lists yourself, you can find them on Best Coast Pairings, Down Under Pairings, and Tourney Keeper. The Cilicia Team Tournament lists can be found in a Google Doc link. You can find it on the Contact Lost YouTube channel. So, let's start with a high-level look at the codexes before we get into the units. If you remember last episode, the Marines, Custos, and Harlequins were actually tied for first. Then the Flying Monkey Con happened, and there were a lot of Codex Marine lists that did well at that event. Thanks to that, they have now broken out into first place on these charts. Trailing behind them are the Harlequins, and then after that, the Custos. So while the Space Marines are leading, our top 3 really hasn't changed too much in the last few weeks. Unless you live in a really wacky meta, like, I don't know, maybe everyone in your area plays Sisters of Silence. Unless something like that's the case, I think it's safe to say that if you were preparing for a tournament, then you definitely need a plan to beat Space Marines. And ideally, you should also have a way to beat Clowns and Custodes. These are strong armies and are appearing at a lot of the top tables. The Dark Angels, Death Watch, Astrometeorium, Imperial Knights, and Thousand Sons are still absent. I do want to give out a shout, though, to an Imperial Guard player that, while he didn't get the 4-1 record, he was on Team Duchy Dudego, who won the Cilicia Team Tournament. It was piloted by Jacob Valkowski, who went 2-2-1 with a tank-heavy guard list that also had a Blood Angel patrol. He had a lot of tanks, mostly tank commanders, hellhounds, and manticores. Even though his score wasn't that good, his team still won the tournament, so congrats to Jacob. Now that we've looked at the codexes, let's take a deep dive in each faction and their lists. Again, we are looking for only 9th edition lists from a GT or major that had a .79 win-loss or better. Let's start with the leader of the pack, Adeptus Astartes, which I'm going to use kind of as an umbrella term here to cover Codex Space Marines, Codex Dark Angels, Blood Angels, Space Wolves, and Death Watch, because their codexes are all about to get merged anyway, and these armies, while they have their own distinct strategies, are very similar and have more overlap than differences. So I identified 11 top-tier Astartes lists. Most of them used a captain and 1 to 3 Eradicator squads. There were also several lists that used Blade Guards, Outriders, and Impulsors. It's pretty obvious just looking at those top 5 that the new Indominus box is treating Marines really well. With the exception of the Impulsor, right? Well, the median number of Impulsors per list was only 2, so it doesn't look like we're in a full transport rush meta yet. Rather, I see this emerging archetype of Space Marine MSU, which, for those who aren't in the know, MSU means multiple small units, squads of like 3 to 5 models running around trying to take out big targets. If we look further down the chart, you'll notice there are several dreadnoughts in here. That's because there were a few dreadnought-heavy lists, which might be another archetype that's emerging for the Space Marines. Which one of these two you use will mostly depend on your chapter. Speaking of chapter, the most popular one was Salamanders. 4 out of the 11 lists had Salamanders. 2 of them were the OG first founding Salamanders, and another 2 were successors. 4 out of 11, maybe a plurality, but it's not a true majority. I think the Space Marine players are still trying to work that out, but Salamanders may be top tier right now for what is probably the top tier faction. While some players were bringing multiple detachments in these lists, the median number of detachments was just 1. It's because there really aren't a lot of reasons to bring extra detachments when you have to give up CP this edition, especially since Space Marines are so CP hungry. The exceptions were players who might want to bring just a patrol in addition to your main battalion so that you can unlock an extra HQ or 2. Space Marines do have really good support units. You definitely don't want more than those detachments, though. I do want to take a moment to specifically talk about the winning list from Flying Monkey Con. Dan Salmons won the major with the Salamander successors. He used a lot of aggressors and Blade Guard vets. He also had a few Outriders, Eradicators, and then a drop pod full of Grav Devastators. This is an absolute terrifying list. It can kill hordes, it can kill parking lots full of vehicles or monsters. It's also kind of durable, so it can defend objectives pretty well. I expect that we're going to see more lists like this, at least between now and the next Codex in October. Number 2 is Harlequins. They continue to be the top dog among Eldari, and have only further cemented that lead since our last episode. I was able to find 6 top-tier Harlequin lists. Every single one of them had a Shadow Seer and bikes. Most of them spent the rest of their points on usually more core units like troops or Star Weavers or Troop Masters. There were 2 lists, however, that bought Craft World allies instead. 3 of the 6 Harlequin lists used Soaring Spite, making it the most popular sub-faction. As a clown player myself, I'm really not surprised by that. I love having that +1 to hit, since I'm advancing almost every unit anyway. Might as well take that while you can. And then Dreaming Shadow is nice, and there were a few players that had that, but in my experience it feels like a trap. You only have a 4-up chance, it's a 50% chance to actually get that off. I'd rather take the +1, it's a lot more consistent. 3 of the 6 lists featured here use the Player of Twilight Warlord trait. This is probably because clowns burn through their CP very quickly, and you need all that you can get. I've been using this Warlord trait lately, and in my experience, I usually get 1 or 2 extra CP out of it. I'm not 100% sold on it, but it's really hard for me to argue with results. The Shadowstone and Twilight Fang were popular relics too. Each one appeared in 3 out of the 6 lists. A couple of them used both relics. The medium number of detachments in Clown Army was 1, because you really only bring a second detachment if you want to be a Craft Worlds player with those Harlequins. Otherwise, you're just wasting CP that could make your bikes -1 to wound or give them a 3-up invul save. Now let's talk about number 3, the Banana People. That's right, I mean the Custodes. There were 5 Custodes armies that qualified for the data, but I can only find 4 of their lists. At that point, all 4 of them used at least 1 captain and between 1 and 5 Custodian Guard units. The Alaris Terminators were also popular in these lists. This may indicate that Custodes have an MSU infantry archetype going, but it's hard to say since they have a lot of good tanks, and there's only 4 lists in the data set. I'd like to see a few more Custodes wins before we could say for certain that yes, this is the ideal Custodes archetype. The median number of detachments was 1 because CP are very valuable for this army. Dreadhost was the most popular sub-faction at 2 of those 4 lists that I found used Dreadhost. Next is everyone's favorite toaster fan club, the AdMech. There are 3 lists, 2 of which were Mars, and the 3rd one was Agrippina. All 3 of them used Daedalus. So both Mars lists use Cowl. The Manipulus and Dune Crawlers were also popular. They appeared in 2 out of the 3 lists. The Divinations of the Magus Warlord trait appeared in both Mars lists, but the Agrippina list, which was Cataphron heavy, used Learnings of the Genitor. While not S tier, the AdMech have definitely some really good tools to play with. A savvy player may find a way to optimize one of these 2 builds. There also might be another Cataphron build out there with the Data Horde worlds, but time will tell if that's able to gain any steam over the next few weeks. Next is Chaos Space Marines. Last episode, a lot of you were just devastated that I couldn't find any Chaos Space Marine lists at the top tables. Well, I'm here to tell you that the Chaos Space Marines had not 1 but 2 lists that qualified since then, and both of them won their event. While they don't have as many lists as the Astartes, 2 GT wins is nothing to sneeze at. Unfortunately, I only found 1 of the 2 lists. The first one was the 3rd player from, I mentioned Duchy Dudego earlier, who won the Silesia team tournament. Well, their top player was, sorry if I mispronounced your name, Jacob Perkunsi. He went undefeated with a Wordbearer list. It featured 2 patrols with lots of rhinos, full of possessed, and 1 rhino had some Zerkers in it. These transports were escorted to the front by a Defiler and then 2 Obliterator teams. I am taking this one with a grain of salt, though, because it was a team event, which, for those of you who aren't aware, each team captain has a say in their players' matchups, so it's possible for a bad list to sneak to the top simply because the player had easy matchups. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened to Jacob, but I'm saying that singles players should not rush to bring a team net list to a singles event. A list like Jacob's, I think, might have trouble against Marines with Eradicators or Harlequins with Haywire Bikes. With just 1 volley from those units and your possessed will be stranded in your deployment zone, or your Defiler goes up in flames. If you want to net list this, then you really need to be thinking about a way to deal with anti-tank elements. Either way, congratulations to Jacob for going 5-0 at this event. The other Chaos Space Marine list, which I sadly cannot find, did win a large combat patrol tournament in Poland. The player is named Eric, and if anyone finds his list, just let me know in the comments below, and that way I can update the data. Next is Death Guard. 3 players qualified, but I did only find 2 of those lists. Both of them used the same core units, a Demon Prince, Plague Marines inside 1 Termite, a Biologist Putrefier, and 2 to 3 Plague Burst Crawlers. One list was just an Inexorable Battalion, while the other list was a soup with 3 detachments, one of which was Poxmongers. The missing list was also from the aforementioned Combat Patrol event in Poland, where a Death Guard player went 4-1. Let's talk Orcs. Last episode, we just had the 1 Orc list, a Dune Buggy spam that won a GT in Australia. This time, we have another tournament-winning list. The final player from Team Duchy Dudego was Michu, who rocked a green tide of Evil Sons. It's pretty common to see a horde list in a team's lineup at World Tournament Championship events. It's a real boogeyman if your opponent is unprepared and you can get the right matchup. But, like the word bearer list above, I will caution singles event players about copying the list because it has bad matchups. Things like Aggressors or Virtus Praetors could just shred these lists. But if you're playing in a gunline heavy meta with a lot of obscuring terrain, then feel free to run a green tide, because you're going to be able to dominate the midfield and they're not going to be able to target you very easily. So you should be able to crush their artillery once you get into combat. Next we have the Necrons. This is the red-headed stepchild of Indomitus, and they got some really cool units, but they only have an outdated codex to work with, whereas the Space Marine codex was really strong to begin with. However, one player at the Silesia Team Championship managed to get a 4-1 record with Necrons, ran a Novak detachment full of destroyers, did have a few Tomb Blades, some Wraiths, Doomday Arcs sprinkled into that list. His warlord trait was Implacable Conqueror, and the relic was Veil of Darkness. It looks like a decent take-all-comers list that I think might actually translate well to singles events if you want to bring it. Here's to hoping they get a good codex in October, because otherwise these Necrons are going to continue to struggle to rack up any more wins. This leaves the Sororitas, Grey Knights, Demons, Chaos Knights, Drukhari, Tau, Tyranids, and Genestealer Cults. Nothing has changed since last episode, so I don't want to spend a bunch of time talking about them. There's really no new list to talk about. I did include them in the charts below, so you can look at those in the link if you missed it last time, or you could just go look at my channel and watch last week's episode if you want more details about those factions. Anyway, I hope this information is useful. Again, if you want to see some nitty-gritty details, there are charts in the links below, as well as a link to my Patreon if you'd like to support the channel. I plan to do more of these videos every few weeks to help us all become better players together. Until next time, peace out.